Hi, and welcome to ADAC Answers, an education podcast for all. I'm your host, Erin Black. ADAC specializes in providing to private school leaders and teachers customized professional development programs to assist their schools with meeting individual student learning needs and increasing overall student achievement. Led and staffed by passionate, committed professionals, ADAC prides itself on delivering to its clients and the students and families whom its clients serve precise solutions to their unique education challenges. ADAC stands for Accountability, Delivery, Access, and Community, 4 words we believe epitomize our work. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and join us in listening to future episodes discussing all things education. Hello, and welcome to another episode of ADAC Answers. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Today we have a special guest named Dawn Florino. Dawn is the founder of a company called The Literacy Coach, where she provides professional development, coaching and training, and other educational services. At ADAC, we're excited to partner with Dawn and welcome her as a guest speaker on our podcast. In today's episode, we will be discussing Dawn's background and experience and dive into her passion for reading and writing. We will hear about specific tips and resources for reading and writing teachers, and we even discuss practical suggestions and how to engage students in their learning and deepen their understanding of the content. Dawn, thank you so much for being here. If you could please just take a moment and briefly introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background and insight into your experience.
Sure, absolutely. I have been in the field of education for about 30 years. And I actually started with a degree in psychology, and I was interested in learning specifically. And then I got my master's degree in elementary education. And then after having been a classroom teacher at the elementary level, pre-K, 3rd grade, 4th grade, and then I moved up to the middle school. And I was intrigued with how many students were really having reading difficulties beyond that of decoding, comprehension, and even stamina. And so when I entered my doctoral program, I chose to study that. The program was in transformational leadership, but my focus was really on literacy and writing.
Great, thank you. How has your diverse experience as a teacher, administrator, and principal influenced your approach to literacy coaching?
So on purpose, I have been a curious educator at every grade level that I've taught, and purposefully taught every grade level I could, but at every grade level approached it as a researcher. I think I was a researcher long before I ever knew I was. And for example, I was a language arts teacher at the middle school, and then I became the Title I director for our entire school district at the capital city in Concord. And when I did that, I noticed interesting patterns and trends across our schools, both the shift in some demographics and then what was happening within classrooms for them. So Concord is a refugee receiving site. And in the 17 years that I was there, we had quite a shift in how many students were international students and had come from such varied backgrounds. So after conversation with my principal as a reading specialist, I think I forgot to mention I was a reading specialist too. But as a reading specialist, when I was that at the middle school, he allowed me to focus specifically on the English language learners and more importantly, their cultural and linguistic acclimation, and to see where we could determine entry points for the kids in their engagement in classrooms. So I took that on with some colleagues as a kind of a 3-year endeavor, and we were able to learn so many fascinating things about their abilities and their knowledge that we could use in a classroom. And that would translate certainly to their reading and most importantly for me, to their writing.
Could you explain the challenges teachers face when teaching students to write, particularly in middle school age students?
Oh my goodness, I feel like this is my life's work. It'll be until my very last breath. And that's because I am a writer. In the 5th grade, I won a writing contest at my elementary school. And that was the moment I decided that people value writing. And from that point on, I was a writer before I was a teacher or a mom or anything else. And I still am. But what I could see in my own writing life and what I could see in my students as I was a teacher and always focused on writing equal to reading in my world was that you learn who your students are through their writing. not only are they revealing technical skill, but they're really revealing some vulnerabilities and the stories of their lives. But some of the challenges are that once they start to tell those stories, it's unpacking how to move them to the next level. And here's what I found. My first dissertation that I designed in my doctoral program was really about taking a look at writing conferences that the teachers were doing and what is the meaningful feedback that they're giving to kids and those decisions they're making along the way about the instruction that would promote the students' writing skill, their investment in the writing process, all of that. And what I was surprised by was writing conferences were not looking the way I thought they should or would. But they were looking very interesting. And if they were happening on a regular basis, it was because those teachers had found an efficient way to talk about the spelling and grammar. And this is no discredit to the teachers. This is to say that's what was easiest to manage. But when you're a writer, really in your bones, that's not the most important part of writing. When you're sitting with the child and you're having the writing conference, a fifth grader whose most meaningful words are going on that paper, or they're not, right? They're not yet. And you're listening for the heartbeat lines of that story. And that comes from Don Graves at UNH. But if you are listening for that heartbeat line, then that conference is really about what is the story they're trying to tell. When it comes to the challenges, it's that time spent with the individual writer that feels unmanageable when you have 100 kids a day. I've been there. When you have a 45-minute class, a 90-minute class, being able to spend meaningful time with the writers and then knowing, where do I start? Like you've got this kid who may be a prolific writer, but they're saying a lot of random things, and you may need to start with some organization, or do they really understand story structure? But it's the where to start. Just the teachers may be well-intended. The most visible thing they often start with is the grammar and spelling.
How can educators strike a balance between fostering creativity and teaching the technical aspects of writing?
In my own work, what has been profoundly successful, and I feel like this has been affirmed through the research, because I do have to, right? I am a creative writer. Also, I use research, right? So I play the balance, right? Always. I'm saying, is this what I'm seeing? Is this really what I'm seeing? And then I pull some research and I'm like, I'm not the only one who sees that. But what I continue to live in this experience of teaching writers, and I still do, since I'm not a principal anymore, I have a totally different job, still in education, but more with professional development and working with teachers, and school leaders. But this begins with creativity. And it's through that creativity, and children are natural storytellers. When they are being creative and they're free to leave their own fingerprint in writing or through the verbal storytelling, that's where you can teach them the technical expertise that propels their ability to tell the stories. For example, when I teach students to write, we read like writers. We examine the decision an author makes to use a paragraph here. And what does that help the reader to do when the writer does that? When the writer uses paragraphs, it's because they want to direct your attention. And so I teach them like, oh, that's a decision the writer made. Oh, here's another decision. We talk about that as part of their reading process, but writing is transcending all of those content areas, skill, and it's a beautiful place to be creative. There's so many ways to write. I love to sample out poetry. I feel like when we start with that creativity, we can always make room for the technical instruction, but it's difficult to teach creativity. Everyone has a creative side. So that's what I would say. Look for places in the classroom where you can allow the children creativity.
What are some common barriers students encounter when it comes to reading comprehension?
One of the best books I ever read about reading comprehension was actually about slow reading. And Tom Newkirk wrote that book. He was a professor at UNH. And I give credit to him for changing the way I think about reading. And in this day, with Dibbles, Ames Webb, and all of the measurements that we do about children's reading and the pace of reading, when I teach courses in higher ed and whatnot, I train my teachers to think about contemplative reading. And we can, so when we have a 12-year-old reader, for example, they're going to think about the text that we put in front of them the way a 12-year-old would, not the way we do. Developmentally, they're going to understand certain things about it, but when they read a story that Brian's Winter or anything by Gary Paulson, let's say, right? They take this book, they're reading The Hatchet, but when they revisit that book at 30 years old, they're going to look at it entirely differently. And so I think sometimes I love to co-construct that idea of comprehension with teachers and talk about ways in which they're helping the children to know for themselves what comprehension means. And Dr. Tim Shanahan writes about this too, about the differences between comprehension strategies or skills. And for example, when I work with readers, one thing I see, they read straight through words they don't know. Whether they can decode them or not, they read straight through them. And as a reading specialist, and any classroom teacher can do this too, but I'm listening for the ways they pause in meaningful phrases and they stress particular words in a sentence. And that tells me the extent to which they understand the contribution that each word is making in that sentence. And when they can do that and they read ultimately with affect, then I feel like they're better understanding the intentions of the speaker in the text, for example, or the narrator. And so when I think about reading fluency, to me, those are so directly related, right? So the pausing, the phrasing, the intonation, that to me feels more important. And Tom Newkirk would say this as well from his book, more important than the rate of reading is the contemplative nature that we handle each sentence. And do we pause to recognize what that author just said and where's the value in that sentence? And so I think comprehension is really key, but we've also conditioned our kids to read quickly and do everything quickly. They do everything quickly right now. So slowing down the reader, there's certainly value to read aloud. I see a lot of teachers reading aloud to their kids. I would encourage them to maximize the value of that read aloud by practicing that slow contemplative reading. And really, there's lots and lots of books about how to maximize the value of that read aloud, but that could be an instructional tool for kids to really think about what they are reading. And we see lots of kids struggling with inference because I see a lot of readers who are passing through the decoding metrics at school. They're passing through the dibbles. They're doing all the right things. So in the research, vocabulary knowledge is most closely related to comprehension. So if you can decode some high impact words like patriotism, okay, that's a hard word to decode, but if you can take that word on, even if you can read that word, that does not mean you understand the big idea behind that word. So I do activities with students. There's one book that I've been reading right now with a student. It's called Just a Drop of Water. And it's a fiction book. It's a historical fiction written from the perspective of a 7th grade boy about 9/11. He was living in a town where one of the terrorists was living. This is a fiction story, but the author writes about why she wrote this story because she actually did have the experience of that 7th grade kid. So the children are decoding, they're reading right through, measuring rate, everything's good, look like a competent reader. And then boom, they take their standardized metrics, their standardized assessments, and they're like, what is happening to comprehension right now? And I'm encouraging teachers let's go upstream. To what extent are we really paying attention to some of this high impact vocabulary within? So Dr. Janet Allen, she does a lot of work with vocabulary. She was one of my best resources when I was teaching in a classroom for really doing meaningful exercises with kids. One of them is a concept circle. You take 4 words that are related and you put those into each quadrant of a circle, and you just have the kids write about what is the relationship between these 4 words. It was so cool to see the kids at first. You do it before you read the text. And then after you read the text, you get such rich responses from them. But if you're focusing on vocabulary, you're going to have much better, deeper comprehension. Even if the child knows the word, like the word fear came up in that story, of course, whether it's explicit or implicitly within the content of that book. And then you're asking the child, in what way does fear play a role in the decisions this character is making? Those are the kind of conversations that I want to hear in classrooms, that I'm encouraging teachers to have with their students in the classrooms, not just can you answer the questions on the page, right? But secondarily, and maybe even primarily, why does this author need to tell this story? And why does she need to tell it to you, a seventh grader? Because you are far enough away from this situation to have never lived in it. And so that's really the first generation of kids who really are two steps away from it, where some of us remember that very scene. So where lots of my boys have been obsessed with World War II or military history books. That's like the entry point for lots of boys. However, this is also a story that I keep bringing to kids, because this is part of our country's history, part of the world's history. So it's important for you to know this too. Just to button it up, the way I'm seeing this reading comprehension is, yes, it's informed by vocabulary. That vocabulary is informed by the background knowledge that is deepened and enriched by the reading and the lived experiences.
As schools access additional funding sources like federal funds, what opportunities do they have to support literacy initiatives?
So in 2009, I was a sixth grade teacher. I got a phone call from my superintendent, and she said, I am wondering if you would consider being our new director of Title I services in this. She got a referral from my assistant principal, but regardless, I'm always one to say yes. So that entire summer, this was 2008 or 9, that entire summer, I got a major boot camp in federal funds. It was the first time I had written a grant, but I was writing a almost $2 million grant that summer. But I learned probably the most valuable, aside from research and content on literacy, I learned some of the most valuable skills of my entire career that summer. And then subsequent to the projects that I worked on in the years going forward. So I spent the next 3 years as a coordinator of all of our Title I and wrote all the grants for that. But within that, there was the era of the stimulus funding, the IRS stimulus funding. So we got additional money for that, and a couple $1 million, I think, for that. As the coordinator of that grant, what I had to do was really examine what was happening in our schools, what is happening now, not just data wise, but with professional development, and what outcomes do we want for our students? And then what does the research tell us we need to use and do for that, help mitigate some of the challenges we were having. And every single school had its own unique way of doing things, but we had to apply the federal funds in the direction of those schools. So flash forward many years, I became a principal in the Catholic schools, and I was accessing as many of the federal grants as I could for my schools. And I had 2 very different schools simultaneous to one another, but one of them was a high poverty school, still is a high poverty school. So we qualified for lots of federal funds there. And one of them was a junior high. So we qualified for Title II and for the CARES Act, the ESSER money, all of it. So I just wrote away. And the important thing to know about the federal funds is that each one is intended for specific outcomes. I love this work because I can work with teachers in classrooms. I can work with school leaders, and every single school is very different. I don't necessarily teach them like how to write a grant, because that's just like writing a dissertation. Like you say your needs assessment, all that stuff. The most important thing is to think about what is going on in your school and what do you want to happen in your school, and who has already done that and knows what works and what doesn't work. And what do you think will work in your school? Because not everything is directly translatable in the research to your context. But to be saying, okay, once we have made that decision and once we do make the purchase, the project management is the second part, equally important, because we're monitoring the progress of that project. And that project maybe sometimes is providing specific services to students, like new summer programming and after school tutoring or things like that. I also work with the school leaders to help braid all of the federal funds together, so they work in synergy with one another. And I work with them on developing sustainable programming that have reasonable goals for our students, especially post-pandemic. Like, we've really washed as much as we can of our data to say, let's recognize where the children are as opposed to being behind. We really have to shift that language, because it would make absolute sense that they are where they are given the varied experiences they've each had. Every single child had a different experience. But that doesn't mean they're behind. They are exactly where they should be given those circumstances.
Right.
So we take what we know about our context and we develop programming, and I help them to monitor the progress of that program or the implementation to assure the fidelity. I encourage my school leaders, let's change the meaning we have for data.
Right.
Let's really understand it's information, it's stories, it's attendance data, it's all kinds of things. How do we know what we know about what is happening in our school, and how can we myth bust when we need to, or challenge assumptions and beliefs about certain kids or certain populations or certain this or certain that? So that's how I think about federal grants. I don't really think about the grant first. I think about, that is giving us guidance in what can help us to improve
Yes.
and improve our work with students in whatever way that we define that improvement would look. And really, whenever I'm writing federal grants, they don't always say improvement will look this way.
Right.
You have to really be creative about how you define that improvement. It's been my favorite job ever. I love working with students, and I still, like I said, I still do work with students and families, and anyone who calls me and says, can you help me? I never say no. But I do love this work with the school leaders because it's having such an important effect for our students in the Catholic schools.
In your experience, how does professional development contribute to improving literacy instruction?
For a long time, I've been doing professional development, both in my private work with different school districts. I've worked in higher ed since 2010, both at the graduate level and undergraduate level. And I currently teach in our Cabrini Institute within our diocese. We have a teacher training program towards certification. And having been a practitioner, when I train teachers, either specifically in reading or in any other content area, I think the most important thing that I've learned is that they are always still learning. And if you are sitting in that classroom or in that professional development, like, you are here to do right by your kids. So I'm very cautious to ever say, don't do this, but do this instead. I'm saying, how is what you're doing working? If you feel like there are adjustments that need to be made, let's try these things. Right. And I really want them to be at the forefront of their own professional development and recognizing where they can be making different decisions. And often too, it's not an all or nothing approach. And I am a super nerd, so I'm always like I said, I'm always trying to study something different or new. But that doesn't mean I have all the answers. When you want to change something, if you change it 1 inch at a time every single day, you're going to see growth over time more than if you try. And this is true of anything, right? You have to be willing to give yourself grace in the role. There is no one exact way to do things overall or with an individual child. And for someone to stand beside you and say, I thought that was going to work. What if we tried this? And that's what I love about the role that I have and the work that I do. And this year I'll be working with ADAC, but just being able to say, I'm walking beside you in this challenge. I'm gonna learn as much as you do. But wow, what an opportunity we have here to try some new things. And you're dealing with human beings. We have to recognize the role of affect in any of this, right? The student's disposition toward what they are learning and the teacher's disposition toward what they are teaching, and all those sort of psychological factors. And because it is dynamic, it's not always predictable. And so I leave a lot of room for grace in that. And I think that's what makes the best teachers, is when they leave room for grace themselves.
How can schools and districts collaborate with organizations like ADAC to enhance professional development in literacy?
I'm actually really excited about the work with ADAC this year with our diocese, because ADAC works nationally. And in any diocese, in any school district, you can often live in a bubble. But going higher up, flying a bit higher above the clouds, you can see how other people are navigating such complex situations. I think that's a real value that I'll be able to take on for our diocese, and that this relationship next year will help to enhance what we do with teachers, because we can say, and I've already talked with several of the members over the past few weeks, members of ADAC, to say, this is what's happening in San Diego. This is what's happening in West Palm Beach. And this is what's happening in Chicago. And we can say, so this is really a trend. Okay, now I'm seeing we all need to unify to help this situation. Okay, how do we need to make sure our teachers are trained? How do we make sure they're getting a lot of professional development? Because I know when I was a teacher in a Catholic school many years ago, we didn't. We've got small schools. Lots of schools are 1 grade level apiece. And so with whom are you going to collaborate? So that's why it's a necessity for us to do what we're doing with ADAC and other dioceses to be able to say, let's shift a little bit to collaborate. So for the benefit of our students. So I'm really excited. I cannot wait for the new school year. I love it.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us today, Dawn. We really appreciate you being here with us and sharing your expertise and experience. So we wish you the best of luck this next school year, and thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. I'm happy to do it.
To everyone at home, if you have any follow-up questions you would like to see addressed in a future episode, or if you want to share your thoughts on today's topic, then please submit them to us on social media using the hashtag ADACAnswers. If you would like to hear future ADAC Answers episodes, then please follow and subscribe. And if you're interested in finding out more about our company and the services we offer, please visit us on our website at www.theadac.com. That is THEADAC.com. Thank you so much for listening to our episode today, and we look forward to you tuning in to our next episode. Again, thank you to all of our listeners from the ADAC team. We'll see you next time.